or otherwise known as suck, squeeze, bang, blow. Welcome back to Just Plain Crazy. I'm Brendan. Thanks again for joining me on my channel. Today we are going to talk about how to adjust the valves in a 4-stroke engine. So as engines wear or engines break in, mechanical components start to wear from the moment that they're operated. I've recently developed a small issue with my Saito. No big deal. I'm going to show you guys what that is. It's time to do the valve adjustment anyway, so I'm going to kill two birds with one stone, and I'm going to show you guys how to do it. We are going to take a look on the inside. This is the Hanger 9 X-Cub running the Saito FG61TS, and if you look inside, you can start to see some oil residue building up on the cowl. That is coming out of those rocker covers right there at the side. So there is oil in there to help lubricate all those oil and fuel. Obviously one of the screws or gaskets or something is leaking there and giving me that residue. And it could just be simply because the cap screws on the top are loose. We're going to go ahead and rip that thing apart. I'm going to time lapse it for you, and then we're going to get to the valve adjustments. All right, as we take a look here, now that we have the cowl off, what do we see? You can see a lot of the oil and fuel residue up here in the firewall around this area. This is a good reason why we epoxy this stuff. This is a mix of thinned epoxy and rubbing alcohol. So I take a 5-minute epoxy, mix it with about a quarter of the mix with rubbing alcohol, and we smear it in the firewall to seal this. So if this wasn't sealed in here, all this stuff would have soaked into the wood and started to ruin it. Also, most of the stuff around the edges, you know, you would like to be sealed also so it doesn't get sucked into the plane and do the same thing. As we look up here at the bottom, it really appears like this lower rocker cover is really where my issue is coming from. Saito recommends every 2 hours of use, I believe it was, that you go through and actually adjust the valves, recheck the bolts on these things. I'm about 2 hours in. This isn't a big tragic issue. We're going to go ahead and get those rocker covers off. Let's take a look. Now that the rocker covers are off, you really get a good look here of what's going on. And as you look around that rocker cover, which I hope you guys can see that going back in, you see that oil residue right there. So you can tell it was definitely that lower rocker cover that was giving me the issue, because as we look up top, you don't see any oil up there. So it's not like it was up there and running down. It was coming out of this one. It also appears on this Saito like they use a lower rocker cover gasket and not here on the upper one. On any engine, we have your rocker arms, you have your valves and valve springs. Now this is the intake right here coming off the carburetor. So this is the intake coming in, which makes this your intake valve. This is going to be your push rod, and this is going to be your adjuster. So we are going to turn that set screw there right after we loosen this. And we are going to be checking the clearance in between the rocker and the top of the valve. Down here on the bottom, you have your exhaust valve, which will line up here to the port. Sometimes with normal automotive engines, they will actually have different clearances in between intake and exhaust. The differences in clearance, obviously one valve runs hotter than another. On any engine, anytime you go to adjust valves, we're talking about an RC airplane engine, a 4-stroke in this case. When we go to adjust those valves, you always want the engine cold. Obviously, metal expands as it heats up, and it contracts as it cools down. So cold room temperature, 70 degrees down here in the layer today, that's exactly where we want things to make these baseline adjustments. Some of the things that we are going to need, I like to have a clean towel for work surface. Try and keep things together, make sure you don't lose them. These caps, whether they're soft aluminum, plastic, whatever yours are made out of, you can crack them if you tighten things down too much. And you'll notice on these, there is a copper sealing washer on that thread. So we do want to clean all this stuff up before we put it back together. I'm a firm believer oil leaks breed more oil leaks, and we don't want mess everywhere. And like I said, this is kind of normal maintenance valve adjustment stuff. Again, rockers, valves, springs. Inside of here is your retainers. Here's your adjustment screw. These are going to be your push rods that would normally run in a normal automotive engine off of a camshaft. In this case, this is going to be lobes right off of our crankshaft that comes all the way through here. So accomplishing the same thing, just slightly different. Some of the tools that we are going to need, obviously you're going to need your instruction manual from the manufacturer. In this case, I have my adjustment wrench right here, which will fit over those lockers. And then you probably have included in your kit or with your engine, this is a feeler gauge, or sometimes otherwise called a go, no-go gauge. And the manufacturer here does not specify an actual specification. So basically they want this close to zero with no limit. So they don't want any perceptible movement in there. If this thing becomes too tight, how would it get too tight? It will get too tight because of the valve when it seats inside the cylinder actually getting seated really well and getting pulled up in. That spring's always trying to keep that valve pushed up in that seat. So if it wears in there a lot, that would actually allow it to recess a lot and take away the complete play in there, holding the valve open all the time, giving you a complete loss of, or a partial loss of compression in a weak running engine or a bad running engine. So one of the things that you want to be careful of when you're using a feeler gauge, these things are very thin. I mean, this is less than 1/1000th of an inch, I believe, or 2/1000ths of an inch. A sheet of paper is like 4. And just to put that into perspective on how thin this is, you don't want to be jamming this thing in there like so, because if you wind up flaring the ends of this, you're going to wind up giving yourself false readings. We always want to make sure that this cylinder is up on the compression stroke. So with a 4-stroke, there's intake, compression, power, and exhaust, or otherwise known as suck, squeeze, bang, blow. That's the easy way to remember that. We want to make sure that we are up on the compression stroke, not on exhaust, because the exhaust valve would be open. So 2 go up, 2 go down. Intake and power go down. So compression and exhaust go up. Obviously, the difference is going to be on 2 of them. You wind up with valves being open, either intake or exhaust. On compression, all right, both valves are going to be closed, and that's what we want to make sure of. So sometimes you can take your spark plug out and literally see in the inside and watch the piston, which is what we are going to do. We're going to watch the piston to come up, and we are going to watch for no rocker movement. And then we know we're up on the compression stroke. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we have clearance here, just like enough to make sure that it's not holding the valve open, but enough that that gauge doesn't go in there and flop around. And as always, for safety, we make sure that all the battery and ignition is completely disconnected. You don't ever want to do this with a prop on and wind up having no lubrication on any components, which would cause them to wear excessively or fail, or otherwise, you know, accidentally have something start up here. As far as this mess goes, we are going to get to cleaning that up using alcohol and some rubbing alcohol on a rag. So let's get to it. I'm going to turn this thing over now so you guys can see it. So remember, this is intake, this is exhaust, and I took the spark plug out, so there's very little compression here. So at this point you can see there's the exhaust turning as I go counterclockwise in my rotation. So the push rod comes up, you see the valve goes down. That means we are coming up on the exhaust stroke. So remember, intake, compression, power, exhaust, which means now the piston's going to start traveling down. You will see the intake push rod start to move. The intake valve will start to move. So that means that valve was open. That was our intake. Valve stops. And now we will watch for that piston. Now, one of the tricks that some guys use, they will go ahead and they will place a screwdriver in here and they will watch when that piston comes up, the screwdriver stops moving. I don't like shoving stuff in the cylinder. That's not a great idea, but it does functionally work. The other thing that now is a good time, you can go ahead and if you wanted to check the gap on your spark plug as well, take a look at the plug, see how it's operating. You can see on the inside of this thing, it is not completely carboned up. It has a nice brownish appearance to it. You're going to see a little bit of carbon buildup in there, which is completely normal. If it was really lean, that thing would be very white on the inside and very, very clean. If it was too rich, it would be really carboned up in there. So I really like the mixture settings on this Saito. At this point, I think the plugs look good. So let's get into adjustment. I want you to take a look here at what we see. So this is the exhaust valve. Again, just look. You can see we're up on compression. And when you look at the spacing, if you can see that spacing in there, you can see this thing is not supposed to fit in there. That is not the appropriate amount of spacing. So if you think that these things are good and they don't need to have valves checked, that's not the case. And if you look at the intake side, this thing fits a little bit more snug. Now, according to our directions, the correct gap for this is close to 0 with no limit. Obviously, we don't want it 0 because as things expand, it's just going to hold them open. And then the piston touching the valves is like you kissing your cousin. It just don't work, right? So we want to go ahead and we want this to have a little bit of play. I think that this is a 0.1 millimeter. I think that this is what we're going to use just for our gauge. So I know I'm not 0. I know I have a little bit. And again, they show you the directions how to do this. So we are going to loosen this one up and we are going to tighten this up. And when we talk about power, if you can't open your exhaust valve, imagine you trying to get in another breath, but you only partially exhale what's already in your lungs. Remember, if you can't get the garbage out, you can't get the new air in. The next thing I want you to keep in mind about our valve adjusting process, we are close to 0, but there is just a hair in there. As I turn this adjustment screw right there, I cannot take that off and then just go ahead and take my wrench and tighten that up. That's no good, because when you do that, you're going to turn the adjuster down in here and you are going to change this gap. So keep in mind, whenever you go to tighten things up, check, check, triple check, but you want to make sure that you hold the adjuster tightly. And then you want to go ahead and snug this thing up. You don't want to turn and add more pressure in there. And from where I was, this will be phenomenally better as far as run-wise. Again, these engines need a little bit of TLC. Once you have it snugged up, you can go ahead and add a little more. Don't go crazy here. You don't want to break this stuff, all right? And again, check, check, triple check. Remember, not jamming this thing in there. It should slide in. easily. Ideally, the right thing to always do is kind of place it in there, make your adjustment, and slide it out. But because I checked so many times, it doesn't work. But don't get jammy with the thing. All right, now we're just going to go up here to the top one. And again, there's too much play up there. So we're going to take this one and loosen this up here. You can leave that thing on there if you want. Put that in there. Get this piece. Put it in. And we're going to turn it. A little bit of pressure, drag on this thing coming out. We're going to hold that adjuster. We're going to snug that nut up. Again, as long as that thing barely fits in and out of there, I'm good. So we're close to zero. That thing's snugged up. Again, I know I'm on compression stroke here. So before we start buttoning up, I'm going to make sure snug fit. Make sure snug fit. I like it. Make sure there's no debris. Make sure your gasket surfaces are all cleaned off and wiped off. And then we are going to go ahead and snug those things up in there. And I think I'm also going to take just a minute drop of thread locker on here just to prevent these things from backing out and loosening up again, which I believe contributed to my oil leak. We will check the gap in our spark plug to make sure everything is good there. And if you wanted to, I mean, these NGKs, they're only like $6. These are the CM6s, the same ones the DA50s use. You can go ahead and check these things. And if you really want to, replace them. They're only $6. It's not a big deal. You can replace them as often as you want to prevent you from having to pull it back apart. So here's the next tip I'm going to give you guys. When you go to install, I put in a new spark plug in here while I'm in here. You can see on the inside there is a rubber holder, insulator, support, whether neoprene rubber or whatever that thing is made of, clips onto the spark plug. When spark plugs go bad, or the boots inside go bad, or wires go bad, they arc that high voltage all over the place. And sometimes that can carry through to other sensitive electronics and cause interference. Also, those rubber boots on the inside of there will start to actually melt and adhere to the surface. So when you're twisting and trying to pull those off, you wind up breaking them, or crack the spark plug and don't realize it and then wind up reusing it and run into problems. So here's the next tip for you. What we use is called dielectric tune-up grease. This is a isolator or an insulator, but it also works as a, I don't know, I don't want to use the word lubricant, but that's what I'm going to say. So what we want to do is you want to take a very small amount of this stuff on a toothpick. Trying to get this into the camera. Just a little bit, right like that, not much. And I'm going to take my boot here and I'm just going to smear it around the inside. Now, what that's going to do, number one, is it's going to prevent the boot from melting the spark plug, so it will come off easier. No, it won't fall off because the retaining clip on the plug boot is what holds it on there. But it also helps to prevent that high voltage from arcing its way down the plug should there be a problem. So anytime you take, and this goes for your regular car that you drive too, if you ever put plugs in it, same exact theory. If you ever remember you can't get plug boots off of stuff, it's because somebody didn't use a little bit of dielectric grease in there. So kind of a tip here for you. Let's get back to it. All right, now that we have the cowl put back on, everything's cleaned up, everything's adjusted, spark plugs are changed. Let's talk about time in a prop. As you go back together with this, we talked about the compression stroke. The compression stroke is where we made all of our adjustments. The compression stroke is the pressure you feel in the engine when you go to flip start this thing. When you go to flip start an engine, if that's what you do, you want to be able to have the prop at the right location for that to happen. If you are somebody that pre-drills for DA 50, 60, you know, anything that uses multiple prop bolts, you have to determine that before you drill it. And that's what drilling a prop really is all about. For these, they use a center hub and a lock nut. So when we position this thing, I want to make sure that I tighten it down on that compression stroke. And I want to make sure that I have the flip where I want that pressure to actually be. So what we're going to do is we're going to install the spinner back plate. We're going to install the prop nut. And again, you're going to kind of feel by turning this thing over where that compression stroke is going to start to hit on this engine. So you want to make sure we got this snug enough just to have that pressure. And you see that was the compression stroke. As we go around, there was the others. And again, right there you can see that compression stroke. So what we want to do is have that thing, since we're going counterclockwise, we want to have that prop flip roughly at a, I don't know, whatever's comfortable for you, 3 or 4 o'clock location. So when you grab this thing with your hand, all right, I like to flip here. Some people like to flip straight down. I like to flip up. And the reason I like to flip up is because I want my hand away from the prop, up and away, not flip down where it's still down in here for the plane to roll over or something else. My preference, your preference, whatever you want to do. So now that we know that thing is there, this is too low for me. So what I want to do is just loosen this thing up now that I'm on that compression stroke. And I am going to turn it to about where I want it, which will probably be right about there. We'll just give it a trial snug down and see. So from there, that's got pressure, and I can fling in my hands away. We'll go around here, pressure, there, and away. All right. So with a 4-stroke, it takes 2 revolutions to complete all your cycles. That's 1. As we come around, there's going to be 2, and then that's going to be your snap. The next thing you want to do is you have to make sure that this is going to line up. If it's pre-drilled, everything has to be kind of in its place, and you don't want the spinner to touch either side of the prop. And you want about equal clearance. So when I look where my bolts are going to be, they're going to be right there. The other thing you want to do, if you take stuff apart frequently, is you can go ahead and actually use pen marks right there on the inside, and you can even mark the hub of the engine, so that way everything before you came apart was exactly the way you wanted it. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten this thing up. And as always, you want to make sure that it's nice and tight, because the last thing you want is this thing to come loose on you. There. And if you have one of these, you can use it for weight. It's actually meant for the spinner bolt. If you have a center bolt spinner, that thing goes on there. I use it for the nose weight right now, and a little security as a jam nut for the prop. So we're going to put that on there. We're going to take, by the way, carbon fiber Falcon 4-inch spinner. This is embossed white on the inside. This thing is absolutely phenomenal. It's not painted on the outside. Super lightweight, super good quality. We're going to position that there. Now, when you go to use your spinners, make sure you guys always use some Loctite on this. Not a lot. We want to use our spinner bolts, and I just dab a little bit. I like this type of Loctite. It comes in the little squeeze-up tube, almost like a lip balm. You just put a little bit on there. Remember, Loctite melts plastic and rubber. So when you position one, you don't want too much and have it running all over other components. Plus, the red stuff usually requires heat to get it out. And I will not tighten up any of those until I have all of them in place. Once they are all set in place, we're going to tighten this up, and we are done with our adjustments. So you can feel a difference in the compression compared to what it was before I started. The prop flip's a little bit more difficult, a little bit better compression in there. Our valve adjustment's right, and we got our valve covers sealed up, and we cleaned up, hopefully, as much of the oil leak in the cowl as we possibly could. And now it has a little natural weathering effect to it. So anyway, it is Brendan. I thank you guys for joining me. Go ahead and rip those 4 strokes apart. Feel confident that you know how to adjust them. Again, if you liked the video, please like it down in there. Subscribe. I appreciate all my current subscribers. I love to have the new people come in. So if you're new, hey, thanks for joining me. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe. Hit that bell notification icon and select all so you get all of my video content. And again, have a great day flying. Peace out.